At dawn on August 12, 2025, the eastern Ukrainian skies erupted in a flash of war as Russia unleashed one of its boldest attacks to date. 180 drones, 120 T-90 tanks, and 1,500 of its best infantry pushing towards 3 Ukrainian cities in an attempt to destroy defenses and win a quick victory before dawn. Moscow believed this attack was unstoppable, but in fact it was rushing into one of the deadliest snares of contemporary warfare. The battlefield was already being swept by Ukrainian surveillance drones every 2 seconds, and underneath lay a deadly network of mines, bomb craters, and anti-tank spikes intended to disable moving armor. Along the ridges, Bodana howitzers targeted their prey with GPS precision as Obliterated tanks and bike assault units waited in reserve to counterattack. Under cover of darkness, Russian soldiers stealthily moved across fields and villages in small groups, assigned not to occupy territory, but to cause damage, shredding wires, attacking defenses, and sowing confusion from within. But the actual horror came at 6:40 a.m., when waves of Russian drones filled the sky from 3 directions: Zaporizhzhia, Pokrovsk, and Novopavlivka. Some transmitted real-time intelligence directly to command posts, while others were loaded with explosives, swooping down in terrifying accuracy into selected targets. Residential blocks, hospitals, grain silos, even an evacuee bus were leveled, claiming more than 200 civilian victims within hours, most of them women, children, and the elderly. Russia planned this as the softening strike, a steel locust storm opening up the battlefield for its land forces. But among the smoke, Ukraine had been preparing a counterstroke that would transform Moscow's daring push into hell. At 7:10 a.m., the growl of engines swept across the skyline as Russia's armored divisions advanced. 120 steel behemoths weighing 45 tons each, their guns shattering bridges, schools, and thronged markets, leveling city blocks to dust in mere minutes. Behind them rolled caravan after caravan of 150 trucks bearing almost 500 of Russia's best infantry, sure the drone attacks had destroyed everything in their wake. That confidence, though, was soon to prove their biggest blunder. By morning, Russia's armor spearhead had advanced further into Ukraine, leveling everything in its path. A notorious command to a battalion officer directed tanks to fire at any building over 2 stories tall, believing they contained enemy spotters. In just minutes, entire blocks of buildings around Novopavlivka were burning. More than 320 civilians were dead, and later analysts would estimate Moscow had dumped nearly $500 million worth of firepower into the front in less than 40 minutes. Russia was convinced it was unleashing a crushing shock attack that would break Ukraine's resistance before the rest of the world could respond. Though what it did not understand was that the countryside itself had been reconfigured into an instrument of warfare. Weeks before, engineers of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine had turned farmland and village roads into a massive killing field. At 7:23 a.m., the first T-90 tank rolled over what appeared to be solid ground close to Zaporizhzhia, only to crash into a concealed 20-foot pit filled with anti-tank mines. The blast ripped the steel behemoth apart, sending its turrets soaring through the air in fire. It was no coincidence. Dozens of the type-lined miles of the countryside, some with mines, others with steel spikes that ripped through tracks and crews, and smaller pits filled with sharpened stakes to catch infantry. Within 6 minutes, 11 tanks were wrecked or stopped without a single shot fired by the Ukrainians, throwing the Russian columns into disarray. Radio transmissions burst as some formations pleaded to withdraw, and others insisted on advancing. But the only safe routes were intentional deceptions leading straight into kill zones. Then, just as chaos was at its highest, Ukraine triggered the second tier of its ambush. Hidden Obliterated tanks and battery guns blazed to life, firing precise firepower at the pinned columns. In a matter of minutes, Russia's proud vanguard was turned into a scattering of blazing hulks and cringing men fleeing from their machines. That's when Ukraine unleashed its motorbike, fast-strike units. Lightweight war bikes with grenade launchers and machine guns, racing 70mm servers across fields to pursue broken infantry. Survivors who believed they had discovered avenues of escape were immediately surrounded, cut down by blasts of rifle or grenade fire into their hideaways. Meanwhile, Russia's infiltration teams, Tiny units inserted to disrupt defenses were caught out. Ukrainian drones traced their heat trails and directed mortar rounds into barns, ditches, and houses where they attempted to reassemble. Whole teams wiped out in a matter of minutes. By 7:20 a.m., the battlefield was a slaughterhouse. Russian survivors clung to wrecks, some even trying to surrender. But Ukrainian Bodana batteries severed their retreat with unrelenting artillery. Within only 40 minutes of fighting, more than 70 Russian armored vehicles had been destroyed or disabled, and over 600 troops were killed, captured, or incapacitated. The unstoppable offensive fanned to the fire the ashes before it had even gotten started. By 7:45 a.m., the field was no longer a battle but a cemetery. Motorcycle patrols alone took over 150 retreating Russian soldiers into custody, and infiltration units, once Moscow's decried deception to sow chaos, were dwindled to sitting ducks under the fixed gaze of Ukrainian drones. On the peripheries of Zaporizhzhia, columns of smoke rose as commanders sent a frightfully straightforward message: the enemy is broken. Push on. What Russia had initiated with sheer muscle power, 180 drones, 120 tanks, and 1,500 top-tier infantry, suffered a defeat in under 90 minutes, hemorrhaging before even it could reach the first defensive belt of Ukraine. Satellite photos afterwards showed a 3.4-mile-wide corridor of devastation, fields pockmarked by over 200 craters where tanks and troops had been devoured alive. The casualties were massive: 42 tanks destroyed, 23 abandoned, more than 80 trucks blown to smithereens with their troops still aboard, and over 1,500 Russian fatalities in the space of 85 minutes, 610 dead, 290 injured, and 150 taken prisoner. To place it in context, a whole regiment was annihilated in the time it would take to play a football match. Even Russia's Spetsnaz infiltration units, 37 teams that had infiltrated Ukraine during the night, were destroyed. 31 totally destroyed, the others scattered and taken captive without having reached a single target. The timing was terrible for the Kremlin. Putin had been expecting to make announcements of territorial advances in advance of his summit with Donald Trump, but instead was greeted by headlines of the worst single-day loss since the conflict had started. Reports alleged 3 generals were put under investigation, one even arrested while trying to escape from Moscow following the tragedy. But in the midst of the bloodshed, one ghostly photo stood above the numbers. From the rubble of Novopavlivka, a Ukrainian soldier gave water to a semi-conscious 19-year-old Russian conscript, his face burned by flames. That image circulated around the world, reminding the world that behind each of those numbers, 610 killed, 290 injured, 150 taken prisoner, were human beings, suddenly snatched away by conflict. Pundits throughout NATO proclaimed the ambush a doctrinal earthquake, a convergence of battle traps from ancient times with 21st century technology. Pits, spikes, and camouflage blended together with drones, GPS-fired artillery, and rocket-speed counterattacks. Ukraine spent less than $20 million on shells, drones, and mines to take apart a Russian strike force that cost more than $750 million. It was evidence that preparation and patience could beat brute force, that fields could be a fortress, and that strategy is more important than numbers. By 8 a.m., Russia's grand offensive was no longer. More than 1,000 dead, 200 destroyed vehicles, and silence where there was once an army. The moral of the story was evident. Real power is not in the weapons used, but in the wisdom, courage, and compassion of those who use them. When history recalls August 12, 2025, it will remember not simply numbers and devastation, but the day when raw strength collided with foresight and was shattered. And if you like this story, support our channel with a like and subscription so we can keep bringing you the untold stories that make our world.